You know what hurts the most? It's not the whispers behind your back or the pitying looks. It's when your own family starts treating you like you're already gone, like you're just some confused old woman who can't remember where she put her keys. But here's the thing about being underestimated. It gives you power they never see coming. And sometimes, just sometimes, that power can change everything in ways they never imagined. My name is Dorothy Henderson, and at 78 years old, I've learned that the cruelest prison isn't made of bars. It's made of assumptions. For the past 2 years, my family has been building those walls around me, brick by brick, whisper by whisper. They think I can't hear them when they huddle in corners at family gatherings, shaking their heads and using words like concerning and decline. They think I don't notice when they exchange those meaningful glances, the ones that say, "Poor Grandma Dorothy, she's losing it." But I notice everything. I always have. Let me take you back to where this all started. It was Thanksgiving 2022, and my dining room was filled with the usual suspects: my daughter Patricia, her husband Robert, my grandson Michael, and a few other relatives. The table was set with my grandmother's china, the same set I'd been using for holiday dinners for over 40 years. The turkey was perfect, golden brown, and carved to perfection by Robert, who insisted on taking over that duty from me 3 years ago because, and I quote, "we don't want any accidents with sharp knives." I was telling a story about my late husband Harold, about the time he accidentally painted himself into a corner while refinishing our bedroom floor. It's a story I'd told before, sure, but it's a good story, and sometimes good stories bear repeating. But halfway through, I noticed the looks. Patricia was giving Robert that look, the one that says, "Here we go again." Michael was checking his phone, clearly bored. And my sister-in-law, Margaret, Harold's sister, was nodding along with that patronizing smile people use when they think you're being cute, but not particularly coherent. "Mom," Patricia interrupted gently, "you told us that story last year, and last Christmas too." The conversation stopped. Everyone looked at me with those careful, concerned expressions. And that's when I realized something had shifted. They weren't listening to me anymore. They were monitoring me. "Did I?" I said, playing along. "Oh, well, it's still a good story." "Of course it is, Mom," Patricia said, her voice dripping with that particular tone of voice people use with children and the elderly. "It's a wonderful story." After dinner, I was clearing plates when I heard them in the kitchen. Patricia was whispering to Robert, but her whispers were the kind that were meant to be overheard. "I'm getting worried about her," Patricia said. "She's repeating herself more often, and last week she called me Jennifer. Jennifer was my sister who died 15 years ago. What Patricia didn't know was that I'd called her Jennifer deliberately, because she'd been acting exactly like Jennifer used to, self-centered, dramatic, and treating everyone around her like they were her personal servants. "Maybe we should talk to her doctor," Robert replied. "Get some kind of evaluation." "She'd never agree to that," Patricia said. "You know how stubborn she is." Stubborn. That's what they called it when I had opinions that differed from theirs. That night, after everyone had gone home, I sat in my living room surrounded by the detritus of our family gathering. Coffee cups with lipstick stains, crumpled napkins, and the lingering scent of Patricia's perfume. I looked around at the house that had been my home for 43 years, at the furniture Harold and I had chosen together, at the photographs documenting decades of family memories. And I realized that my family was already planning my funeral. Oh, not literally, of course, but they were planning the death of Dorothy Henderson as an autonomous human being. They were already discussing me in the past tense, as if the woman who'd raised them, who'd built a business empire alongside her husband, who'd navigated decades of joy and sorrow with grace and intelligence, had already ceased to exist. That's when I decided to give them exactly what they expected to see. The whispers had started small, you understand. A forgotten name here, a misplaced appointment there. Normal things that happen to everyone, but when you're pushing 80, suddenly every little mistake becomes evidence of your failing mind. My daughter Patricia, she's 52 now, works as a real estate agent downtown. She was the first to start the concerned conversations. Patricia had always been my achiever. Straight A's in school, captain of the debate team, full scholarship to State University. She'd married Robert when she was 26, and they'd had Michael 2 years later. For years, she'd been the perfect daughter, successful, responsible, devoted. But somewhere along the way, that devotion had turned into something else, something that felt more like management than love. "Mom, you called me Jennifer yesterday," she'd say, her voice dripping with that particular brand of patience reserved for children and the elderly. "Jennifer is your sister who died 15 years ago." What Patricia didn't know was that I called her Jennifer on purpose. See, Jennifer always had this way of making everything about herself, turning every conversation into an opportunity to showcase her own drama. She'd interrupt constantly, finish other people's sentences, and treat everyone around her like they were characters in her personal soap opera. And lately, Patricia had been doing the exact same thing. It started with little things. She'd come over for our weekly lunch dates and spend the entire time talking about her latest real estate deals, her problems with her clients, her concerns about Michael's job prospects. When I'd try to share something about my own life, a book I'd read, a documentary I'd found interesting, a conversation I'd had with a neighbor, she'd listen with half an ear and then redirect the conversation back to herself. "That's nice, Mom," she'd say, not really listening. "Speaking of books, did I tell you about the house I'm trying to sell to that author? She's being so difficult about the inspection." So when I started calling her Jennifer, it was my little private joke, my way of pointing out that she was turning into the very person she'd always complained about. But try explaining irony to someone who's already decided you're losing your marbles. Then there was my grandson Michael, Patricia's boy, 26 years old and fresh out of business school with his MBA and his expensive suits and his carefully managed social media presence. He'd always been ambitious, even as a child. While other kids were playing video games or riding bikes, Michael was reading Forbes and asking me about my investment portfolio. He started visiting more often after that Thanksgiving, which should have made me happy. I'd always enjoyed his company. He was bright, articulate, and one of the few people who understood my passion for financial planning. But his visits weren't about spending time with Grandma anymore. They were reconnaissance missions. "So, Grandma," he'd say, settling into Harold's old recliner with a cup of coffee, "how are you managing with all your investments? That's a lot to keep track of." "I manage just fine," I'd reply, watching his face carefully. "Oh, I know you do," he'd say quickly. "I just meant, if you ever want someone to help you organize things, or maybe set up some kind of system to make it easier." What he meant was, "When are you going to let me take over your money?" Michael would ask careful questions about my finances, my investments, my property. He'd comment on the stock market, probe about my portfolio's performance, and make subtle suggestions about simplifying my financial arrangements. "Just want to make sure you're not overwhelmed, Grandma," he'd say, but his eyes were already calculating numbers in his head. I'd catch him sometimes, when he thought I wasn't looking, taking pictures of documents on my desk with his phone. Bank statements, investment summaries, property tax bills. He'd wait until I left the room to get more coffee, then quickly snap photos before I returned. "Just documenting things in case you need help later," he explained when I caught him once. For your own protection." Protection. From what exactly? From my own money? And then there was Patricia's husband, Robert. Oh, Robert was the worst of all. He'd speak to me like I was a child, using that slow, deliberate voice people use when they think you can't understand complex concepts. Robert was 55, worked in middle management at an insurance company, and had never had an original thought in his life. He was the kind of man who repeated things he'd heard on television as if they were his own insights. "Now, Dorothy," he'd say, his voice painfully patronizing, "let's talk about what's best for everyone." Everyone meaning everyone but me, of course. Robert had this way of explaining things to me that made my teeth ache. He'd describe simple concepts, things I'd understood before he was born, as if he was teaching a remedial class. "You see, Dorothy, when you get older, your cognitive abilities naturally decline. It's nothing to be ashamed of. It happens to everyone. Except it wasn't happening to me. Robert would also take charge of situations without asking. He'd answer my phone when he was visiting, intercept my mail, and make decisions about my daily routine as if I wasn't sitting right there. "Dorothy needs to rest now," he'd announce to visitors, or "Dorothy can't handle too much excitement." The most infuriating part was how he'd speak about me in the third person when I was right there in the room. "Dorothy's been having some memory issues lately," he'd tell my friends when they called. "She's not quite herself." Not quite myself? I was more myself than I'd ever been. The dynamic between the three of them was fascinating to observe once I started paying attention. Patricia was the leader, the one who initiated the conversations about my condition. Robert was the enforcer, the one who implemented their decisions without bothering to ask my opinion. And Michael was the beneficiary, the one who stood to gain the most from my supposed incompetence. They had a system. Patricia would bring up a concern, my forgetfulness, my confusion, my supposed inability to manage my affairs. Robert would validate her concerns and suggest practical solutions. Michael would reluctantly agree that something needed to be done, playing the role of the caring grandson who was only looking out for my best interests. It was beautifully orchestrated, and it might have worked if I hadn't been watching every move they made. The final straw came 6 months ago during what they called a family intervention. They'd planned it carefully, I realized later. Patricia had called me on a Tuesday morning, her voice artificially bright and cheerful. "Mom, Robert and I were thinking it might be nice to have a family dinner this weekend. Just the 4 of us, like old times. Would Saturday work for you?" "Of course, dear," I'd said, already suspicious. Patricia rarely suggested family gatherings unless she wanted something. "Great, we'll bring everything. You don't need to worry about cooking or cleaning or anything. Just relax and enjoy yourself." The fact that she felt the need to tell me not to worry about cooking in my own house should have been a bigger red flag. Saturday arrived, and they showed up at my door with grocery bags and serious expressions. They busied themselves in my kitchen, preparing what they called a simple meal, but which involved more coordination than a military operation. Patricia directed traffic while Robert handled the heavy lifting, and Michael set the table with my good china. "Why are we using the good dishes?" I asked. "It's just family dinner." "We thought it would be nice," Patricia said, not meeting my eyes. "You know, special occasion." Special occasion, like a last meal. After dinner, they insisted on cleaning up while I sat in my living room, feeling like a guest in my own home. When they finally joined me, they arranged themselves in a semicircle facing me like I was on trial. And in a way, I suppose I was. Patricia sat directly across from me, her hands folded in her lap and her expression serious. Robert positioned himself to her right, his arms crossed and his jaw set in determination. Michael took the chair to her left, looking uncomfortable but resolute. "Mom," Patricia began, "we need to talk." Those 4 words. The 4 words that every elderly person dreads hearing from their adult children. The 4 words that mean your independence is about to be taken away in the name of love and concern. "About what?" I asked, though I already knew. Patricia reached into her purse and pulled out a thick manila folder. My heart sank as I recognized what it was. A dossier. Evidence. A case file against Dorothy Henderson, compiled by the people who claim to love her most. "We've been noticing some changes in your behavior lately," Patricia said, her voice gentle but firm. "Some concerning patterns that have us worried about your safety and well-being." She opened the folder and began pulling out papers. Doctor's appointment reminder cards, pharmacy receipts, utility bills, bank statements. Each piece of paper was a potential weapon in their arsenal against my competence. "You missed your mammogram appointment last month," Patricia said, holding up a card. "And your dental cleaning the month before that." "I rescheduled them," I said. "But you didn't remember to tell us," Robert interjected. "We only found out when Dr. Morrison's office called, looking for you." "I didn't know I was supposed to report my medical appointments to you," I said, my voice sharper than I'd intended. Patricia held up a prescription bottle. "You've been taking your blood pressure medication at the wrong times. The pharmacy called to ask if you needed help organizing your pills. I changed the timing because it was affecting my sleep, I explained. I discussed it with my doctor. But you didn't tell us, Michael said. We had to find out from the pharmacy. Find out. As if my medical decisions were intelligence that needed to be gathered and analyzed by the family council. Patricia continued pulling papers from the folder. Bank statements showing what she called erratic spending patterns, which were actually investments I'd made without consulting them. Utility bills that had been paid late because I'd been traveling and had paid them when I returned. Mail that had accumulated in my mailbox because I'd been visiting my sister in Arizona for 2 weeks. Each piece of evidence, taken in isolation, could be interpreted as a sign of decline. But none of them were evidence of anything except the fact that I was living my life without running every decision past my family first. We think it's time to consider some changes, Patricia said, her voice gentle but firm. Maybe look into assisted living, or at least having someone come in to help with daily tasks. Assisted living, the euphemism for, we're putting you away where you can't embarrass us anymore. And we think it might be time to discuss your financial arrangements, Michael added, trying to sound casual. Maybe set up some kind of trust or power of attorney just to make sure everything is protected. Protected. From me, apparently. I looked at each of their faces, Patricia with her practiced concern, Robert with his barely concealed eagerness, Michael with his uncomfortable shifting in his seat. These were people who claimed to love me, yet here they were, ready to ship me off to some facility where I could drool quietly in a corner and not embarrass them anymore. I'm not going anywhere, I said simply. But Mom, Patricia pressed, Dr. Martinez says what? I interrupted. That I'm getting older? That I move a little slower than I used to? That I sometimes need a moment to remember where I put my reading glasses? He says you're showing signs of cognitive decline, Robert chimed in, and I wanted to throw something at his smug face. Based on what? I demanded. Based on the fact that I told him I sometimes forget where I put my keys? Based on the fact that I occasionally lose track of time when I'm reading? Based on the fact that I don't remember every single detail of conversations from months ago? It's not just that, Patricia said, her voice pleading. It's everything together. The missed appointments, the confusion about medications, the way you repeat stories. What stories do I repeat? I asked. Patricia and Robert exchanged glances. Well, you've told us about Dad painting himself into the corner several times, Patricia said. It's a good story, I said, and apparently you don't appreciate it as much as I do. Mom, please, Patricia said. We're not trying to hurt you. We're trying to help you. Help me do what? Disappear? Become invisible? Turn into someone who doesn't have thoughts or feelings or opinions? No, of course not, Michael said. We just want to make sure you're safe. Safe from what? From living my own life? That's when I made my decision. If they wanted to play games with my mental capacity, then I'd play along. But I'd play to win. You see, there's something my family doesn't know about me. Something I've kept hidden for over 50 years. During my marriage to Harold, I wasn't just a housewife baking cookies and tending to the garden. I was also the silent partner in his construction business, the one who handled the books, made the deals, and turned a small local operation into a multi-million-dollar enterprise. Harold got the credit. That's how things worked back then. Women were expected to be the power behind the throne, not the occupant of it. But I was the one who negotiated the contracts, analyzed the market trends, and made the strategic decisions that built our fortune. I remember the first big deal we landed, a contract to build a shopping center on the outskirts of town. Harold was ready to accept the developer's initial offer, but I saw an opportunity for more. I spent weeks researching comparable projects, analyzing construction costs, and studying the developer's financial statements. When I presented my findings to Harold, he was amazed. "Dorothy," he said, looking at my detailed analysis, "you should have been a business major." "I would have been," I replied, "if women had been encouraged to pursue business degrees when I was in college. Instead, I'd majored in education, which was considered appropriate for a young woman in the 1960s. But I'd always been fascinated by numbers, by patterns, by the intricate dance of supply and demand that drove the economy. So I educated myself, reading everything I could get my hands on about finance, real estate, and investment strategies. Harold was smart enough to recognize that I had talents he lacked. He was good with people, skilled with his hands, and had an instinct for construction that couldn't be taught. But I was the one who understood the business side of things. I was the one who turned his craftsmanship into profit. We made a perfect team. Harold would meet with clients, assess their needs, and provide estimates. I would analyze the numbers, negotiate the contracts, and manage the financial aspects of each project. Our company grew from a 2-person operation to a firm employing over 100 people. But because I was the silent partner, because Harold was the face of the business, no one ever suspected that the little woman making coffee for the meetings was actually the strategic mastermind behind the company's success. When Harold died 5 years ago, I didn't just inherit his money. I inherited his contacts, his investment portfolio, and his real estate holdings. But more than that, I inherited the freedom to make my own decisions without having to pretend they were someone else's ideas. The funeral was a revelation. Dozens of business associates came to pay their respects, and many of them pulled me aside to share stories about Harold's business acumen. They talked about his sharp negotiating skills, his ability to spot profitable opportunities, his knack for making smart investments. I smiled and nodded and accepted their condolences, but inside I was thinking, that was me. All of it. The negotiating, the opportunity spotting, the investment decisions. That was Dorothy Henderson, not Harold Henderson. But I couldn't tell them that. Even in death, Harold needed to maintain his reputation as the brilliant businessman, and I needed to maintain my reputation as the devoted wife who'd been lucky enough to marry such a capable man. So when my family started questioning my mental capacity, I decided to give them exactly what they expected to see. I began playing the part of the confused old woman. I'd repeat stories, forget names on purpose, and ask the same questions multiple times. I'd shuffle a little more when I walked, speak a little slower when I talked, and look puzzled when they mentioned recent events. The performance was so convincing that even I sometimes wondered if I was losing myself in the role. But then I'd retreat to my study, the one room in the house they rarely entered, and I'd review my financial statements, make investment decisions, and plan my next moves with the clarity of mind that had served me well for decades. My study was my sanctuary, the place where I could be myself without pretense. The walls were lined with books on finance, economics, and business strategy. My desk was equipped with 2 monitors, a high-end computer, and all the tools I needed to manage my investments. This was where I conducted my real life, the life my family never saw. I had accounts with 3 different investment firms, a portfolio worth over $8 million, and real estate holdings in 4 states. I tracked market trends, adjusted my asset allocation based on economic indicators, and made trades with the confidence of someone who'd been doing it for 50 years. But to my family, I was just confused old Dorothy who couldn't remember where she'd put her reading glasses. The performance required careful calibration. I had to seem confused enough to validate their concerns, but not so confused that they'd take immediate action. I had to appear vulnerable enough to trigger their protective instincts, but not so vulnerable that they'd call for emergency medical intervention. I studied acting techniques, believe it or not. I borrowed books from the library on method acting and character development. I watched documentaries about dementia and Alzheimer's disease, not to mock the people who suffered from these conditions, but to understand how cognitive decline actually manifested so I could avoid accidentally displaying real symptoms. The hardest part was maintaining the performance consistently. I had to remember to forget things, to seem confused about events that were perfectly clear to me, to appear helpless in situations where I was actually in complete control. I created a notebook, hidden in my study, of course, where I tracked my performances. I recorded what I'd said and done, how my family had reacted, and what adjustments I needed to make to maintain the illusion. Tuesday, March 15th, I'd write, told Patricia I couldn't remember Michael's girlfriend's name, She corrected me with exaggerated patience. Need to increase frequency of memory lapses to maintain credibility. Or, Saturday, March 19th. Asked Robert to explain how to use the microwave. He seemed pleased to help, but also concerned about my ability to live independently. Good response. Continue with technology confusion. The whispers grew louder. She's getting worse, Patricia would tell Robert in what she thought was a private conversation. Yesterday, she asked me 3 times what day it was. What she didn't know was that I was testing her, seeing how she'd react each time, studying the way her patience wore thin with each repetition. The first time, she'd answered cheerfully. The second time, she'd been less enthusiastic. The third time, she'd sighed and spoken to me like I was a particularly slow child. "It's Tuesday, Mom," she'd said, her voice tight with frustration. "It's been Tuesday all day." The test revealed everything I needed to know about her character. She wasn't asking herself why I might be confused about the day. She wasn't considering that I might be anxious about something or trying to communicate a concern I couldn't express directly. She was simply categorizing my behavior as evidence of decline and calculating how much of an inconvenience it would be for her. Michael became bolder in his questions about my will. "Grandma, have you thought about updating your estate planning? Maybe we should sit down with a lawyer, make sure everything is in order." He'd pat my hand condescendingly, as if I didn't understand that he was really asking about his inheritance. But I understood perfectly. I also understood that he was thinking about his future, about the house he wanted to buy, about the lifestyle he wanted to maintain. "I don't really understand all that legal stuff," I'd tell him, watching his eyes light up with opportunity. "Maybe you could help me with it?" "Of course, Grandma," he'd say eagerly. "I'd be happy to help you navigate all the paperwork. We could set up a trust, maybe establish some powers of attorney, just to make sure everything is properly managed." Managed. By him, of course. I let him research estate planning attorneys, let him make appointments, let him believe he was taking control of the situation. But I was always one step ahead, always planning my next move while he thought he was planning mine. The hardest part of the performance was the isolation. I couldn't share my real thoughts with anyone, couldn't discuss my actual plans or concerns. I had to pretend to be confused about things that were perfectly clear to me, had to act helpless in situations where I was actually in complete control. I missed intellectual conversation. I missed being able to discuss market trends with someone who understood finance or debate political issues with someone who'd actually read the policy papers. I missed being seen as a person with opinions and insights worth considering. But I also began to understand something important about aging in our society. I realized that the whispers and assumptions my family was making about me were happening to elderly people everywhere. I started paying attention to how older adults were treated in stores, in restaurants, in medical offices. I noticed the condescending tones, the dismissive attitudes, the assumption that age automatically equaled incompetence. I began volunteering at a senior center, partly to maintain my cover story and partly to understand the experiences of other people my age. The stories I heard were heartbreaking. Man after man, woman after woman, describing how their adult children had gradually taken over their lives, making decisions for them, treating them like children who couldn't be trusted with their own affairs. "My daughter took away my car keys," one woman told me during a lunch program. "She said I was too old to drive safely. But I've been driving for 60 years without an accident. I just had one little fender bender in a parking lot, and suddenly I'm too dangerous to be on the road. My son moved me into a retirement home," another woman shared. "He said it was for my own good, that I couldn't manage living alone anymore. But I was managing just fine. I just needed help with the yard work and maybe some assistance with grocery shopping. Instead, I lost my independence entirely." These stories confirmed what I'd suspected, that concerns about elderly family members were often more about the adult children's anxieties than about actual problems with the elderly person's capabilities. I also began to understand the financial motivations behind some of these interventions. Several of the people I met had been declared incompetent by their families and had lost control of their assets. Their children had taken over their finances, ostensibly to protect them, but in reality, to secure their own inheritances. "My daughter has power of attorney now," one man told me. "She says she's managing my money to make sure I don't get scammed. But she's been selling my investments and using the money to pay for her daughter's college tuition." When I asked her about it, she told me I was confused and didn't understand what I was talking about. These conversations fueled my determination to expose what was happening in my own family. I wasn't just fighting for my own independence. I was fighting for the dignity and autonomy of elderly people everywhere. But I also began to understand something about my own family's behavior. They weren't evil people. They weren't deliberately trying to hurt me. They were scared. They were scared of losing me, scared of watching me decline, scared of making the wrong decisions about my care. Patricia had been traumatized by watching her father-in-law deteriorate from Alzheimer's disease. Robert had grown up with a mother who'd suffered from depression and had been unable to care for herself. Michael had never known his other grandmother, who died when he was young from complications related to dementia. They were projecting their fears onto me, seeing signs of decline that weren't there because they were terrified of what might happen if they didn't act quickly enough. But understanding their motivations didn't excuse their behavior. Fear doesn't justify taking away someone's autonomy. Love doesn't give you the right to make decisions for another adult without their consent. As the months passed, I refined my performance and deepened my understanding of the situation. I also began planning my counterattack. I knew I couldn't simply stop the act and expect them to believe me. I needed evidence, proof that my mind was as sharp as it had ever been. That's when I decided to consult with Dr. James Patterson, a neurologist at the University Hospital. Dr. Patterson had been recommended by my regular physician, Dr. Martinez, who'd been growing concerned about my family's reports of cognitive decline. "Mrs. Henderson," Dr. Martinez had said during my annual checkup, "your daughter has called several times expressing concern about your memory and cognitive function. She says you've been repeating stories, forgetting appointments, and seeming confused about medications." "What do you think, Dr. Martinez?" I asked. "Have you noticed any changes in my mental function?" Dr. Martinez looked at me carefully. "Honestly, no. You seem as sharp as ever. Your memory is excellent, your reasoning is sound, and you're clearly engaged with current events and complex topics. But your family's concerns are persistent, and I think it might be helpful to have a neurological evaluation just to put everyone's mind at ease." Dr. Patterson was a distinguished man in his 60s with kind eyes and the sort of authoritative presence that commanded respect. His office was in the medical school, surrounded by the energy and intellect of academic medicine. "Mrs. Henderson," he said during our first meeting, "I understand there are concerns about your cognitive function. Can you tell me about these concerns?" I told him everything. About my family's behavior, about the whispers and assumptions, about the evidence they'd compiled against me. I also told him about my performance, about the way I'd been deliberately acting confused to see how they'd react. Dr. Patterson listened without judgment, taking notes and asking clarifying questions. When I finished, he sat back in his chair and studied me for a long moment. "Mrs. Henderson," he said finally, "what you're describing sounds like a very sophisticated social experiment. You've been studying your family's behavior and testing their responses to perceived cognitive decline. Is that wrong of me?" I asked. "Not wrong," he said, "but it's certainly unusual. Most people in your situation would simply confront their family directly about their concerns." "I tried that," I said. "They didn't listen. They'd already decided I was declining, and anything I said to the contrary was just evidence of my confusion." Dr. Patterson nodded. "I've seen this before. Sometimes families become so focused on protecting their elderly relative that they stop seeing them as an autonomous individual. They make assumptions based on age rather than actual evidence. So what do I do?" "First," he said, "let's establish definitively that your cognitive function is normal. I'd like to put you through a comprehensive neuropsychological evaluation. If the results show that your mental acuity is intact, Then we can discuss how to address your family's concerns." I agreed immediately. Over the next several weeks, Dr. Patterson put me through every test imaginable. Memory assessments, problem-solving exercises, attention span measurements, language evaluations, everything designed to paint a complete picture of my cognitive abilities. The testing was exhausting, but also exhilarating. It felt good to be challenged intellectually, to demonstrate my capabilities to someone who was actually paying attention. Dr. Patterson was impressed by my performance, particularly on the executive function tests that measured planning, reasoning, and abstract thinking. "Mrs. Henderson," he said during our final session, "your cognitive function is not only normal for your age, it's exceptional. Your memory, both short-term and long-term, is excellent. Your problem-solving abilities are superior to most people 20 years younger. Your attention span and focus are well within normal ranges, and your language comprehension and expression are completely intact." "So I'm not losing my mind?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Not even close," Dr. Patterson said with a smile. "In fact, I'd say your mind is one of your greatest assets. You've demonstrated remarkable strategic thinking, emotional intelligence, and analytical capabilities throughout this process." That's when I shared my plan with Dr. Patterson. I told him about my family's increasing pressure to declare me incompetent, about Michael's interest in my finances, about Patricia's research into assisted living facilities. I also told him about my concerns regarding their true motivations. Dr. Patterson listened carefully, and when I finished, he made a suggestion that would change everything. "Mrs. Henderson," he said, "what would you think about arranging a family meeting where we could discuss my findings? Sometimes families need to hear from a medical professional that their concerns, while well-intentioned, are not based on actual evidence." "They won't believe it," I said. "They've already decided I'm declining. They'll think you're just being nice to me." "Then perhaps," Dr. Patterson said thoughtfully, "we need to be more dramatic in our approach. What if we arranged a formal competency evaluation in the presence of your family? Something that would leave no doubt about your cognitive abilities?" I thought about it for a moment. "You mean like a demonstration? A performance?" "Exactly. But this time, instead of performing confusion, you'd be performing competence. You'd be showing them exactly how sharp your mind really is." I loved the idea. After months of pretending to be confused, I could finally show them who I really was. But I wanted to do it in a way that would have maximum impact, in a setting that would make it impossible for them to dismiss or minimize. "Dr. Patterson," I said, "what would you think about doing this during a will reading? My family is very interested in my estate planning. It might be the perfect opportunity to reveal the truth about my mental state." Dr. Patterson's eyes lit up. "That's brilliant. A will reading is a formal legal proceeding. If we can demonstrate your competence in that setting, with witnesses and legal documentation, it would be impossible for anyone to question your mental capacity." We spent the next few weeks planning our strategy. I would continue my performance right up until the moment of truth, giving my family no reason to suspect that anything had changed. Dr. Patterson would prepare a comprehensive report documenting my cognitive abilities, complete with test results and professional opinions. Meanwhile, I reached out to my lawyer, Thomas Morrison. Tom had been handling my legal affairs for 20 years, and he was one of the few people who knew the true extent of my assets and my mental acuity. "Dorothy," Tom said when I called him, "I've been wondering when you'd contact me. Your daughter has been asking about setting up a meeting to discuss your estate planning." "I know," I said. "That's actually why I'm calling. I want to arrange a formal will reading, but I want to do it on my terms." I told Tom everything about my family's behavior, about my performance, about Dr. Patterson's evaluations, and about my plan to reveal the truth in a dramatic fashion. Tom listened with growing amazement. "Dorothy," he said when I finished, "this is either the most brilliant strategy I've ever heard, or the most elaborate revenge plot in legal history." "Maybe it's both," I said with a smile. "If you're right about this," Tom continued, "we need to be very careful. False claims of incompetency can be a form of elder abuse, and there are legal protections in place for people in your situation. But we also need to be absolutely sure of your position before we make any moves. What do you suggest? I suggest we set a trap, let them think they're winning, then reveal the truth in a way that leaves no room for doubt. But Dorothy, I have to ask, are you absolutely certain about their motivations? Are you sure they're not just genuinely concerned about your well-being? I thought about that question for a long time. Tom, I've been watching them for months. I've seen the way they look at my house, heard the way they talk about my situation when they think I can't hear them. Patricia has been researching assisted living facilities behind my back. Michael has been taking pictures of my financial documents. Robert has been treating me like a child who can't be trusted to make her own decisions. But are they doing it out of greed or out of fear? Does it matter? I asked. The result is the same. They're trying to take away my autonomy, my independence, my right to make decisions about my own life. Whether they're doing it for money or out of misguided concern, the impact on me is identical. Tom was quiet for a moment. You're right, he said finally. Intent matters in criminal law, but in this case, the behavior is the same regardless of the motivation. And you have every right to defend yourself against it. So you'll help me? Of course I will, but I want to make sure we do this right. We need to document everything, make sure we have witnesses, and ensure that your cognitive evaluation is conducted by someone whose credentials can't be questioned. Dr. Patterson is department head at the University Medical Center, I said. He's published over 100 research papers on cognitive assessment and dementia. I don't think anyone could question his qualifications. Perfect. Now let's talk about the will itself. What do you want to accomplish? That was the question I'd been thinking about for months. What did I want to accomplish? Revenge, justice, education, all of the above? I want them to understand what they've done, I said. I want them to realize that they've been treating me like I'm already dead, like I'm just a problem to be solved rather than a person with thoughts and feelings and rights. And financially? I want to make sure my money goes to people and organizations that will use it wisely. I want to support causes I care about, not just hand over my life's work to people who see it as their due. What about your family? Do you want to disinherit them completely? I thought about that. No, I still love them, even after everything they've done. But I want them to earn their inheritance. I want them to prove that they can see me as a person, not just as a source of money. How do we do that? Conditions, I said. Requirements they have to meet before they can inherit. Things that will force them to confront their assumptions about aging, about elderly people, about me. Tom smiled. I like it. What kind of conditions? Education, volunteer work, therapy, things that will help them understand what they've done and why it was wrong. And if they refuse, then the money goes to charity. There are plenty of organizations that fight elder abuse, that support aging in place, that provide services to elderly people who want to maintain their independence. We spent the next hour crafting the perfect strategy. Tom would draft 2 wills, one that reflected my family's worst fears about their inheritance, and another that offered them a path to redemption. The will reading would be a formal legal proceeding, with Dr. Patterson present to address any questions about my mental competency. Dorothy, Tom said as we wrapped up our meeting, I have to tell you, in 30 years of practicing law, I've never seen anything quite like this. You've turned the tables on your family in a way that's both brilliant and poetic. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? It's a powerful thing, and power, used correctly, can be a force for positive change. The next few weeks were a delicate balancing act. I had to continue my performance while also preparing for the big reveal. I had to seem confused and helpless while actually orchestrating one of the most complex legal and psychological maneuvers of my life. Patricia's behavior during this period was particularly illuminating. She'd call me every morning, ostensibly to check on me, but really to monitor my mental state. She'd ask the same questions each time, probing for signs of confusion or disorientation. Hi, Mom. How are you feeling today? Do you remember what day it is? Did you take your medications? Are you eating regular meals? I'd answer with carefully calibrated responses, sometimes seeming sharp and alert, other times appearing confused or forgetful. I wanted to keep her off balance, never quite sure whether I was having a good day or a bad day. "I'm fine, dear," I'd say some days. "Just finished reading the Wall Street Journal and catching up on my investments." Other days, I'd sound more confused. "Oh, Patricia? I wasn't expecting you to call. What day is it again? I've been having trouble keeping track." The inconsistency was deliberate. People with actual cognitive decline often have good days and bad days, and I wanted to mimic that pattern. But I also wanted to keep my family guessing, never allowing them to feel completely confident in their assumptions. Michael's visits became more frequent and more focused. He'd bring his laptop and offer to help me organize my financial information. He'd sit at my kitchen table, supposedly helping me understand my investment statements, but actually learning everything he could about my assets. "Grandma, you have accounts with 3 different investment firms," he'd say, his voice carefully neutral. "That seems like a lot to keep track of. Maybe we should consolidate everything into one account to make it easier for you." "Do you think that would be better?" I'd ask, playing the confused old woman perfectly. "I think it would be much simpler," he'd say. "And maybe we should add my name to the account, just in case you need help with anything." Just in case. The 3 little words that justified so much control. "That sounds like a good idea," I'd tell him. "You're so smart about these things." He'd light up with excitement, thinking he was making progress. What he didn't know was that I'd already moved most of my assets into accounts he didn't know about, working with investment advisors who understood the importance of maintaining elderly clients' independence. Robert's behavior was perhaps the most infuriating. He'd taken to speaking for me in social situations, answering questions that were directed at me as if I wasn't capable of responding for myself. "How is Dorothy doing?" a neighbor would ask when we encountered her at the grocery store. "She's having some challenges," Robert would reply before I could open my mouth. "We're taking things one day at a time." Challenges. As if I was a problem to be managed rather than a person to be respected. I started keeping a detailed journal of these interactions, documenting every condescending comment, every assumption, every instance of being treated like a child. I knew I'd need evidence of their behavior when the time came to confront them. "Tuesday, April 12th, I wrote. "Robert answered for me when Mrs. Chen asked about my garden. He said I was having trouble managing the yard work, and they were looking into options for me. I have been maintaining my garden just fine with the help of a landscaping service I hired myself." Friday, April 15th, I recorded. "Patricia called 3 times to check on me because I didn't answer the phone immediately. When I finally answered, she said she was worried because I usually answer on the first ring. She didn't consider that I might have been in the bathroom or outside getting the mail." Sunday, April 17th, I noted. "Michael suggested I might want to simplify my medication routine by using a pill organizer. I told him I manage my medications just fine, but he insisted on buying me one anyway. He said it would make him feel better to know I was staying on top of things." Each entry in my journal was another piece of evidence of their controlling behavior. I was building a case against them, documenting their gradual erosion of my autonomy. But I was also documenting something else, their genuine concern for me. Because despite everything, I could see that they did love me. They were just expressing that love in ways that were harmful and controlling. Patricia would tear up sometimes when she thought I wasn't looking. I'd catch her staring at me with an expression of profound sadness, as if she was already mourning the loss of the mother she'd known. Michael would bring me little gifts, books he thought I'd enjoy, flowers for my garden, photos of places he'd traveled. He was trying to connect with me, to show his love in ways that didn't involve taking control of my life. Even Robert, for all his condescension, was trying to be helpful. He'd fix things around my house without being asked, research medical specialists when I mentioned a health concern, and make sure I had everything I needed during his visits. They weren't evil people. They were scared people who were expressing their fear in destructive ways. But understanding their motivations didn't excuse their behavior, and it didn't make their actions any less harmful. As the date of the will reading approached, I found myself both excited and nervous. I was excited to finally reveal the truth, to show them who I really was, to reclaim my identity as a capable, intelligent woman. But I was also nervous about their reactions, about how they'd respond to learning that I'd been deceiving them. Would they be angry, hurt, embarrassed, all of the above? I also wondered if they'd be able to understand why I'd done it. Would they see it as a necessary deception, a way of protecting myself from their assumptions and controlling behavior? Or would they see it as a cruel trick, a betrayal of their trust and concern? The week before the will reading, I decided to give them one final test. I called a family meeting, not unlike the intervention they'd staged for me, but with a different purpose. "I've been thinking about what you all said," I told them when they gathered in my living room. "About my memory, about my ability to manage things on my own. Maybe you're right. Maybe I do need more help." Their faces lit up with a mixture of relief and triumph. "Finally," they thought, "she's seeing reason." "We're so glad you're open to getting help, Mom," Patricia said, reaching over to squeeze my hand. "We just want what's best for you." "I know you do," I said, "and I've been thinking about the assisted living facilities you mentioned. Maybe we should look into that." The room fell silent. This was more than they'd expected, more than they'd hoped for. "Are you sure, Mom?" Patricia asked carefully. "That's a big decision." "I'm sure," I said. "I don't want to be a burden on anyone. If I can't take care of myself anymore, then maybe it's time to let someone else take care of me." I watched their faces as they processed this. Patricia looked relieved, but also sad. Michael seemed excited about the possibilities this opened up. Robert looked like he was already calculating the practical implications. "We don't have to rush into anything," Patricia said. "We can take our time, look at different options, find the right place for you." "That's very kind," I said. "But I think we should also talk about my finances. If I'm going to be in assisted living, I won't need to manage my investments anymore. Maybe Michael should take over that responsibility." Michael tried to hide his excitement, but I could see it in his eyes. "If that's what you want, Grandma, I'd be happy to help." "And maybe we should update my will," I continued. "Make sure everything is in order before I make any big changes." "That's a good idea," Robert said. "We should definitely make sure all your legal affairs are properly arranged." I nodded. "I'll call my lawyer tomorrow and set up a meeting. We can all go together, make sure everything is handled correctly." They agreed enthusiastically, thinking they were finally getting what they wanted. What they didn't realize was that they were walking into a trap of their own making. The next morning, I called Tom Morrison and set up the will reading for the following Friday. I also called Dr. Patterson and confirmed that he'd be able to attend to address any questions about my mental competency. "Everything is set," I told Tom. "Are you ready for this?" "I've been ready for weeks," Tom said. "I have to admit, Dorothy, I'm looking forward to seeing their faces when they realize what's really been happening." "Just remember," I said, "the goal isn't to hurt them. It's to educate them. I want them to understand what they've been doing, not just punish them for it." "Understood. But Dorothy, you realize there's a chance they might not take this well. They might be angry, embarrassed, or even vindictive." "I know," I said, "but I can't keep living this lie. I can't keep pretending to be someone I'm not just to manage their emotions. They need to see the real me, and they need to confront the real consequences of their behavior." The days leading up to the will reading passed slowly. I continued my performance, but it was getting harder to maintain. I was eager to drop the act, to stop pretending to be confused and helpless. Patricia called several times during the week, each time sounding more concerned about my sudden willingness to give up my independence. "Mom, are you sure you're making the right decision?" she asked during one call. "You've always been so independent. It seems unlike you to give up so easily." "Maybe I'm just tired," I said. "Maybe I'm tired of fighting to prove that I'm still capable when everyone around me thinks I'm not." "We don't think you're not capable," Patricia protested. "We just think you might need some help." "What's the difference?" I asked. "If I need help with everything, then I'm not really capable, am I?" Patricia was quiet for a moment. I guess I never thought of it that way. Think about it now, I said. Think about what it feels like to have everyone around you assume you can't handle your own life. It was a moment of truth, one of the few times during this whole charade that I let my real feelings show. Patricia seemed to hear something in my voice that made her pause and reconsider. "Mom," she said softly, "have we been making you feel like you're not capable?" "What do you think?" I asked. She was quiet for a long time. "I think we might have been," she said finally. "I think we might have been so focused on protecting you that we forgot to ask what you wanted." "Thank you for saying that," I said. "That means more to me than you know." "Are you still sure about the assisted living idea?" "Let's see what happens at the lawyer's office," I said. "Maybe we can figure out a different solution." Friday morning arrived, and Patricia insisted on driving me to the lawyer's office. "We don't want you getting confused about directions," she said, using the same patronizing tone she'd been using for months. But this time, instead of feeling frustrated, I felt a sense of anticipation. This was the last time she'd speak to me that way. After today, everything would change. Tom Morrison's office was in one of those old downtown buildings with high ceilings and dark wood paneling. The conference room was impressive, with a large mahogany table and leather chairs that spoke of serious business and important decisions. We arrived a few minutes early, and I could see my family looking around nervously. They'd never been in a lawyer's office for anything this significant, and the formal atmosphere was intimidating. "This is quite a setup," Michael said, trying to sound casual. "Are all will readings this formal?" "Mr. Morrison likes to do things properly," I said. "He's been my lawyer for 20 years, and he's always been very thorough." Robert was studying the law books on the shelves, looking like he was trying to appear knowledgeable. Patricia sat quietly, her hands folded in her lap, looking nervous and sad. At exactly 10 o'clock, Tom Morrison entered the room, followed by Dr. Patterson and a court reporter. The presence of the court reporter seemed to surprise my family, and I could see them exchanging glances. "Good morning, everyone," Tom said formally. "We're here today for the reading of Dorothy Henderson's last will and testament. But before we begin, I need to address some concerns that have been brought to my attention." Patricia leaned forward. "What kind of concerns?" "Concerns about Mrs. Henderson's mental competency," Tom replied. "It's been suggested that she may not be capable of making informed decisions about her estate." I watched as my family exchanged glances. This was the moment they'd been waiting for, official recognition that I was incompetent, that they'd been right all along. "Well," Robert said, clearing his throat, "we've all noticed some changes in Dorothy's behavior lately. Memory issues, confusion, that sort of thing. She's been having trouble with daily activities," Patricia added. "We're just concerned about her well-being." "And her ability to manage her finances," Michael chimed in. "We want to make sure she's protected from making any unfortunate decisions." Tom nodded gravely. "I see. Well, given these concerns, I think it's appropriate that we have an expert evaluation of Mrs. Henderson's mental capacity before proceeding with any estate planning." That's when I saw it. The flash of triumph in Patricia's eyes. She thought she'd won. They all did. "I've asked Dr. James Patterson to join us today," Tom continued. "He's a neurologist who specializes in cognitive assessment." "Dr. Patterson?" Dr. Patterson stood and opened his briefcase, pulling out a thick file. "Good morning, everyone. I understand there are questions about Mrs. Henderson's mental competency?" "Yes," Patricia said quickly. "We're very concerned about her cognitive decline." Dr. Patterson opened his file and pulled out several sheets of paper. "I see. Well, I've been conducting comprehensive neuropsychological evaluations on Mrs. Henderson for the past several months. Would you like to hear my findings?" The room fell silent. I could practically hear my family's hearts pounding. "Mrs. Henderson," Dr. Patterson continued, "has undergone extensive testing including memory assessments, attention span evaluations, problem-solving exercises, language comprehension tests, and executive function measurements. The results are quite remarkable." He paused, looking around the table at each of my family members. "Mrs. Henderson's cognitive function is not only normal for her age, it's exceptional. Her memory, both short-term and long-term, is excellent. Her problem-solving abilities are superior to most people 20 years younger. Her attention span and focus are well within normal ranges, and her language comprehension and expression are completely intact. Patricia's face had gone pale. But she's been so confused lately. She repeats stories, forgets names, asks the same questions over and over. Dr. Patterson looked at her with professional interest. Can you give me some specific examples? Well, Patricia stumbled. She called me Jennifer last week. Jennifer was her sister who died 15 years ago. And she asked me 3 times in one day what day it was, Robert added. She seemed confused about her medications, Michael said, and she missed some doctor's appointments. Dr. Patterson made notes as they spoke. When they finished, he looked up with a slight smile. Mrs. Henderson, would you like to address these concerns? This was my moment. I straightened in my chair, letting the vacant expression drop from my face like a mask I was tired of wearing. I'd be happy to, I said, my voice clear and strong. Patricia, I called you Jennifer because you were acting exactly like your aunt used to, making everything about yourself and treating me like a child. It was my way of pointing out the similarity, though apparently the subtlety was lost on you. Patricia's mouth fell open. Robert, I asked you 3 times what day it was, because I wanted to see how long it would take for you to lose patience with me. The answer was 3 times, by the way. And the 3rd time, you spoke to me like I was mentally deficient. Robert's face turned red. Michael, I wasn't confused about my medications. I was testing whether you'd check up on me behind my back. Which you did, by calling my pharmacy and asking about my prescription history. Michael couldn't meet my eyes. As for the missed appointments, I continued, I rescheduled them deliberately to see if anyone would notice. And they did notice. But instead of asking me about it, they decided it was evidence of my declining mental state. The silence in the room was deafening. Dr. Patterson nodded. Mrs. Henderson has been conducting what we might call a social experiment. She's been observing her family's reactions to behaviors that could be interpreted as signs of cognitive decline. But why? Patricia whispered, and I could hear the pain in her voice. I looked at my daughter, really looked at her, and saw the woman I'd raised, the little girl who used to climb into my lap for bedtime stories. But I also saw the woman who'd been ready to ship me off to a memory care facility without even asking what I wanted. Because, I said softly, I wanted to understand what was really in your hearts. I wanted to know if you loved me enough to support me through actual difficulties, or if you were just waiting for an excuse to take control of my life. We love you, Mom, Patricia said, tears streaming down her face. Do you? I asked. Because love doesn't assume the worst. Love doesn't make decisions for someone without including them in the conversation. Love doesn't treat a person like they're already gone just because they're getting older. But we were trying to protect you, Michael said. From what? I asked. From living my own life? From making my own decisions? From being treated like an adult with thoughts and feelings and rights? Robert finally spoke up. We were scared, he said quietly. We were scared of losing you, scared of watching you decline like my father did. So you decided to bury me before I was dead, I said. You decided to treat me like I was already gone, like I was just a problem to be solved rather than a person to be loved. That's not what we meant to do, Patricia said. But that's what you did, I replied. You whispered about me behind my back. You made assumptions about my capabilities based on my age rather than my actual abilities. You researched assisted living facilities without asking me what I wanted. You tried to take control of my finances without consulting me about my wishes. We thought we were helping, Robert said. You thought you were inheriting, I corrected. You thought you were positioning yourselves to take over my life and my assets when I became too confused to object. Michael looked up sharply. That's not fair, Grandma. You never what? I interrupted. You never took pictures of my financial statements with your phone? You never asked about adding your name to my investment accounts? You never suggested that I might want to simplify my affairs by turning them over to you? Michael's face burned with embarrassment. I was just trying to help." "You were trying to help yourself," I said. "You were trying to secure your inheritance by convincing everyone that I was too incompetent to manage my own money." "Now," I said, turning to Tom, "I believe we have a will to read." Tom nodded and opened another file. "The last will and testament of Dorothy Henderson, dated this month, has been prepared with full knowledge of Mrs. Henderson's complete mental competency, as established by Dr. Patterson's evaluation." He began to read, and with each word, I watched my family's faces change. The will was nothing like what they'd expected. Instead of dividing my assets among family members, I was leaving the bulk of my estate to various charities, educational foundations, healthcare organizations, and programs for elder care reform. Patricia was getting the house, but with the stipulation that she could never sell it and that it would pass to a charity upon her death. Michael was receiving a modest trust fund, but nothing like the windfall he'd been expecting. Robert was getting nothing at all. "However," Tom continued, "Mrs. Henderson has prepared a second will, which will go into effect if certain conditions are met." I stood up, feeling stronger than I had in months. "The conditions are simple. I want my family to participate in a program designed to educate people about ageism and elder abuse. I want you to spend time volunteering at memory care facilities, working with people who genuinely need help. And I want you to attend family counseling sessions with me so we can work through the trust issues that have developed." I paused, looking at each of them in turn. "If you're willing to do these things, if you're willing to really examine your behavior and make changes, then I'll execute the second will, which provides more substantial inheritances. But those inheritances will come with responsibility. You'll be required to use part of them to support elder rights organizations and to continue the volunteer work." Patricia was crying openly now. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I thought we were helping you." "I know you did," I said, my voice gentler now. "And maybe, in some twisted way, you were trying to help. But you were also trying to control me. You were making assumptions about my capabilities based on my age, not on any actual evidence." Michael finally looked up. "Grandma, I was wrong. I was thinking about the money, and I shouldn't have been. The money was never the real issue," I told him. "The real issue was respect. The real issue was whether you saw me as a person with my own thoughts and feelings, or just as an old woman who needed to be managed." Robert remained silent, but I could see the wheels turning in his head. He was probably calculating whether it was worth it to go through the program I'd outlined. "I'm not asking you to decide right now," I said. "Take some time to think about it. But I want you to understand something. I'm not going anywhere. I'm not moving to assisted living. I'm not giving up my independence. And I'm not going to let anyone make decisions about my life without my input." Dr. Patterson gathered his papers. "If there are any questions about Mrs. Henderson's mental competency in the future, I'll be happy to provide updated evaluations. But I want to be clear. This woman is as sharp as anyone in this room. Sharper, in fact, given what she's accomplished here today." After everyone left, I sat alone in Tom's office, feeling emotionally drained but oddly victorious. Tom poured me a cup of coffee and sat down across from me. "How do you feel?" he asked. "Tired," I admitted, "but also relieved. I've been carrying this deception for so long, it feels good to finally be honest. Do you think they'll follow through with your conditions?" I thought about it for a moment. "Patricia will. She's hurt and embarrassed, but she loves me. She'll do whatever it takes to make this right. Michael, maybe. He's young and selfish, but he's not cruel. He might surprise me. And Robert?" I laughed. "Robert will do whatever Patricia tells him to do. He's not brave enough to stand up to her when she's determined. And if they don't follow through, then I'll know I made the right decision. My money will go to organizations that actually help people instead of enabling more bad behavior." Tom nodded. "You know, Dorothy, what you did today was remarkable. You proved that assumptions about aging and mental capacity are often wrong. You showed that older adults can be just as capable of strategic thinking and long-term planning as anyone else. I also showed that I can be just as manipulative and devious as anyone else, I said with a wry smile. Well, Tom grinned. Nobody's perfect. The drive home was quiet. Patricia had offered to take me, but I'd declined. I wanted to drive myself, to reclaim that small piece of independence. As I pulled into my driveway, I looked at the house I'd lived in for 43 years. It looked the same as always, but something felt different. I felt different. For the first time in 2 years, I wasn't performing. I wasn't pretending to be confused or helpless. I was just Dorothy Henderson, a woman who'd lived through 8 decades of changes, who'd built a business empire from nothing, who'd raised children and buried a husband, who'd made mistakes and learned from them. I was a woman who refused to disappear just because she'd gotten older. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of emotions and conversations. Patricia called every day, sometimes crying, sometimes angry, always apologetic. She'd started researching ageism and elder abuse, and she was shocked by what she learned. "Mom, I had no idea how common this is," she said during one of our conversations. "There are thousands of older adults who are declared incompetent every year, often based on family testimony rather than actual medical evaluation." "I know," I said. "That's why I wanted Dr. Patterson's evaluation to be so thorough. I wanted to make sure there was no question about my competency." "But why didn't you just tell us? Why did you have to deceive us?" "Because you weren't listening," I said. "You'd already decided I was declining, and anything I said to the contrary was just evidence of my confusion." Patricia was quiet for a moment. "You're right. We weren't listening. We were so focused on what we thought was happening that we couldn't see what was actually happening." "And what was actually happening?" "You were fine," she said. "You were managing your life perfectly well, and we were treating you like you weren't." "Yes," I said. "That's exactly what was happening." Michael came to visit the following weekend. He looked uncomfortable, shifting from foot to foot on my front porch like a little boy who'd been caught doing something wrong. "Grandma," he said, "I've been thinking about what you said. About respect and assumptions and all that. I think maybe I need to learn more about what it's like to be older in this society." I invited him in for coffee, and we talked for hours. He told me about the pressure he'd felt to secure his financial future, about his fear that there wouldn't be enough money for his own children someday. I told him about the fear of being dismissed, of being treated like a burden, of losing not just independence, but dignity. "I never thought about it from your perspective," he admitted. "I was so focused on what I thought was best for everyone that I never asked what was best for you." "That's the thing about assumptions," I said. "They blind us to other people's experiences." "Will you teach me?" he asked. "Will you help me understand what I did wrong and how to do better?" I looked at this young man, my grandson, who despite his mistakes was still someone I loved deeply, and I felt a spark of hope. "Of course," I said, "but you have to be willing to really listen, not just wait for your turn to talk." "I promise," he said. "I want to understand." Robert took longer to come around. He attended the family counseling sessions that I'd insisted upon, but he was clearly uncomfortable with the whole process. The therapist, Dr. Sarah Kim, was excellent at drawing out underlying issues and helping us communicate more effectively. "Robert," Dr. Kim said during one session, "you seem to have strong feelings about Dorothy's capabilities. Can you tell us where those feelings come from?" Robert shifted uncomfortably. "Well, she's getting older. People's minds deteriorate as they age. It's just natural." "But Dorothy's mind hasn't deteriorated," Dr. Kim pointed out. "She's been evaluated by a neurologist who confirms that her cognitive function is excellent. So where do these beliefs about her capabilities come from?" It took several sessions, but eventually Robert admitted that he'd been influenced by his own father's experience with dementia. His father had developed Alzheimer's in his 70s, and Robert had been traumatized by watching his strong, capable father fade away. "I think I was projecting my fears onto Dorothy," he said finally. "I was so afraid of going through that again that I started seeing signs that weren't there." "And maybe," Dr. Kim suggested gently, "you were also looking for a way to have some control over a situation that felt frightening and unpredictable?" It was a breakthrough moment. Robert broke down crying, admitting that he'd been terrified of losing another father figure and that trying to control my life had been his way of protecting himself from that fear. "I'm sorry, Dorothy," he said through his tears. "I wasn't trying to hurt you. I was trying to protect myself." "I know," I said, "and I appreciate your honesty." "But Robert, your fear doesn't justify taking away my autonomy. Your trauma doesn't give you the right to control my life." "I know," he said. "I know that now." The volunteer work at the memory care facility was eye-opening for all of us. Patricia threw herself into it with typical intensity, spending hours with residents who had various stages of dementia. She came home from her first day looking shell-shocked. "Mom," she said, "I met a woman there who's only 65. She has early-onset Alzheimer's, and she was a brilliant attorney before she got sick. She's nothing like I imagined." "What did you imagine?" "I thought people with dementia were just gone. Just empty shells, but she's still there, you know? She still has moments of clarity. She still has feelings and preferences and opinions. She's still a person." "Yes," I said quietly. "She is." Patricia's work at the facility led to a deeper understanding of the difference between normal aging and actual cognitive decline. She learned that most older adults remain cognitively sharp throughout their lives, that the stereotype of the confused, helpless elderly person is largely myth. "Mom," she said after a few weeks of volunteering, "I realized something. Most of the people I'm working with are nothing like what I expected. They're intelligent, engaged, and capable. They just need help with specific things, not with their entire lives." "And what does that tell you about your assumptions about me?" "It tells me I was wrong," she said. "I was seeing decline where there wasn't any. I was treating you like you had dementia when you were perfectly fine." Michael's volunteer work focused on activities programs. He organized game nights and book clubs, and he was amazed by the residents' intelligence and engagement. "Grandma," he said after a few weeks, "there's this guy there, Harold, who's 91. He beats everyone at chess, and he knows more about the stock market than I do. But his family never visits because they say he's not himself anymore. What do you think about that? I think they're missing out on knowing an amazing person. And I think maybe I was about to miss out on knowing you." The family counseling sessions continued for several months. We worked through years of accumulated resentments, misunderstandings, and unexpressed fears. We learned to communicate more directly, to ask questions instead of making assumptions, and to respect each other's autonomy. Dr. Kim helped us understand that families often struggle with changing dynamics as members age. "It's natural for adult children to worry about their parents," she explained, "but it's important to distinguish between reasonable concern and controlling behavior." "How do you tell the difference?" Patricia asked. "Ask yourself, are you responding to actual evidence of decline, or are you responding to your own fears and assumptions? Are you including your parent in decisions about their life, or are you making decisions for them? Are you supporting their independence, or are you taking it away?" These were hard questions, but they led to important conversations. We established new boundaries and new ways of interacting. Patricia agreed to ask before assuming I needed help. Michael learned to show interest in my life without interrogating me about my finances. Robert was still working on it, but he was trying. 6 months after the will reading, I called another family meeting. This time, it was in my living room, with everyone sitting in a circle rather than facing me like a tribunal. "I've been thinking about our arrangement," I said, "about the conditions I set for revising my will." I could see the tension in their faces. They'd all been working hard to meet my requirements, but they were still uncertain about where they stood. "I'm proud of the work you've all done," I continued. "Patricia, your volunteer work has been exceptional. The facility director tells me you've become an advocate for residents' rights. Michael, your programs have brought joy to people who rarely get visitors. And Robert, your participation in our counseling sessions has been genuine, even when it was difficult." Relief flooded their faces. "But more than that," I said, "I've seen real changes in how you treat me. You ask for my opinion instead of making assumptions. You respect my choices even when you don't agree with them. You've learned to see me as a person, not just as someone who needs to be managed. I pulled out an envelope. Tom has prepared a revised will. It's more generous than the original, but it still includes the volunteer work requirements. I want you to continue what you've started, not because I'm forcing you to, but because it's the right thing to do. Patricia was crying again, but these were different tears. Mom, I'm so sorry for what we put you through. I'm sorry we didn't trust you, didn't respect you, didn't listen to you. I'm sorry too, I said. I'm sorry I felt like I had to deceive you to get your attention. I'm sorry it took such a dramatic gesture to make you see me as a person. Michael leaned forward. Grandma, can I ask you something? Are you really okay? I mean, are you happy living alone, managing everything by yourself? I smiled. I'm more than okay. I'm thriving. I'm making new investments. I'm traveling. I'm taking art classes at the community center. I'm living my life on my own terms, which is all I ever wanted. But what if you do need help someday? Robert asked. What if you really do develop health problems or cognitive issues? Then I'll ask for help, I said simply. But I'll ask for help with specific things, not with my entire life. And I'll expect you to respect my choices about how I want to handle those challenges. We will, Patricia said firmly. I promise we will. Good, I said, because I'm not going anywhere anytime soon. I have too much living left to do. And that, my friends, is the truth. At 78, I'm not winding down. I'm just getting started. I've learned that age is not a disease to be cured or a problem to be solved. It's just another stage of life with its own challenges and opportunities. I've also learned that respect is not something you lose when you get older. It's something that can be taken away by people who don't understand the difference between caring for someone and controlling them. But most importantly, I've learned that it's never too late to stand up for yourself, to demand the dignity you deserve, and to show people that assumptions about aging are often wrong. The whispers have stopped now. Oh, I'm sure there are still people who think I'm just a sweet old lady who got lucky, who doesn't really understand what happened to her. But my family knows better. My friends know better. And most importantly, I know better. I know that I'm Dorothy Henderson, and I'm exactly where I belong. In my own house, making my own decisions, living my own life. And if anyone has a problem with that, well, they can take it up with Dr. Patterson. He'll be happy to explain to them just how sharp my mind really is. The truth is, getting older doesn't mean getting weaker or less capable. It means getting wiser, more experienced, and less willing to tolerate nonsense. It means knowing who you are and what you want, and having the courage to fight for both. So to all of you out there who are watching your parents or grandparents age, remember this. Respect their autonomy, trust their judgment, and ask before you assume. Don't let fear drive you to take away their dignity. Don't let your own anxieties about aging cloud your judgment about their capabilities. And to all of you who are aging yourselves, remember this. You have the right to be treated with dignity, to make your own choices, and to live your life on your own terms. Don't let anyone convince you that age automatically equals incompetence. Don't let anyone make you feel like you're a burden just because you're getting older. Age is not a surrender, it's a victory. And I plan to keep winning for many years to come. My story has had ripple effects beyond my family. Patricia started a support group for adult children learning to navigate aging parents respectfully. Michael changed his career path, focusing on elder law and advocacy. Even Robert found his calling, using his experience with his father's dementia to help other families facing similar challenges. But perhaps the most important change is in how we talk to each other. We've learned to listen, really listen, without immediately jumping to solutions or assumptions. We've learned to ask questions instead of making statements. We've learned to respect each other's experiences and perspectives. The volunteer work continues, not because I require it, but because it's become a passion for all of us. We've seen firsthand how society treats older adults, and we've committed ourselves to being part of the solution. My investment portfolio is doing better than ever, by the way. Turns out that decades of experience, combined with a sharp mind and the wisdom that comes with age, makes for pretty good financial decision-making. Who would have thought? I'm also writing a book about this experience, working with a local publisher who specializes in social justice issues. The working title is The Assumption Trap: How Ageism Hides in Plain Sight. I hope it helps other families avoid the mistakes mine made. Before I close, I want to make sure you know that stories like mine are happening all around us. Older adults are being dismissed, controlled, and infantilized every day, often by the very people who claim to love them most. If you've been moved by what you've heard today, if you've recognized something in your own family or your own fears about aging, then please consider subscribing to our channel. We share stories that matter, stories that challenge assumptions and inspire change. We believe that every stage of life has value, that every person deserves respect, and that it's never too late to learn, grow, and make a difference. Hit that subscribe button, ring the notification bell, and join our community of people who refuse to let age define their worth. Share this story with others who might need to hear it. Let's start a conversation about how we treat older adults in our society and how we can do better. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for taking the time to understand that behind every older face is a person with dreams, fears, intelligence, and dignity. And thank you for helping to spread the message that age is not something to be ashamed of. It's something to be celebrated. The whispers may have stopped, but the conversation is just beginning. And I, Dorothy Henderson, at 78 years young, am ready to keep talking for as long as anyone is willing to listen. Until next time, this is Dorothy Henderson reminding you that wisdom comes with age, but respect should come with being human. Don't let anyone tell you differently.